Hey guys, it's Catherine Morgan here, and you're in for a very special treat this afternoon. I am just about to invite our podcast guest on the show today. We're going to be doing a live podcast episode, and we're streaming this to Facebook predominantly because the subject that we're talking about is how being on the spectrum or having family or friends on the spectrum can affect how we manage money. And this was something that has come up in my community on a number of occasions. And so I decided to go and seek out somebody who is an expert in this particular topic. So I'm absolutely delighted to bring my guest on the show today. I'm just going to bring Andrew on the screen. So a massive welcome to you, Andrew. How are you this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to tell the listeners today and the people watching on Facebook a little bit about your backgrounds. So Andrew is the founder of Planning Across the Spectrum, an incredible business name. And he specializes in helping individuals and families and anyone who really needs extra support with autism or other disabilities in order to pursue financial independence. Now, Andrew, first of all, welcome to the show. And
Thank you.
this is really important to me because when we talk about the emotions and behaviors around money, we don't sometimes think about the consequences or implications for people who are on the spectrum. And I actually have family members that are on the spectrum, and this comes up in family conversations as well. So first of all, Andrew, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to work in this specialist area?
So I was a financial planner at a large insurance company for many years. I left and was independent. And it wasn't until only a few years ago, having been a financial planner, that I was diagnosed with autism. And that really led me to want to change my business to really focus a lot more. The reason I became a financial planner isn't as clear. It just kind of seemed like it was a good idea at the time when I was 21. Focusing really on those with autism, that was really, more a passion of what came out of a late diagnosis.
And how did that impact you with the fact that it was a late diagnosis?
So it was very hard and very great at the same time, right? It was really awesome to have just a reason for some things and some things that made sense. And even just small little things that, I was able to understand. So one of the things of just, I don't do well with open-ended questions. So just saying that to somebody beforehand, right? Before a podcast, for example, and just more understanding about myself.
Wow, that's part of the process, isn't it? Is actually just understanding what the challenges are for people that are on the spectrum. And I guess the spectrum itself is quite, it's a great long thing, right? Isn't it? Some people can be, from an autistic perspective, my understanding is that some people can be have different challenges and different symptoms than somebody else who's also got the same diagnosis. Andrew, what specific challenges did you face with money yourself after you had that diagnosis? Were there any particular things that when you were growing up around money you found difficult or challenging in terms of managing money?
So one of the unique things about me is in a lot of autism, there's what we call a special interest, right? It's that topic that can't learn enough about, can't talk enough about. For me, it happens to be money. So I would say that I'm lucky in the regards that one of the challenges I didn't have was money because, to take a negative term, almost obsessed with it in just so many ways. It just fascinated me so much. But I would say that's definitely, the exception. It just happens to be my interest, not, world history or something else.
Yeah. And what inspired you, therefore, to use your experiences and things to start your own business?
So I think that was part of it, right? Is that even though I had a good understanding of money, right? Because it's probably one of the only things I have a good understanding of. But I really saw that there was a lack of help, especially in the, let's say, autism community, especially when it comes to conversations around money. And just there was there was a gap that needed to be filled, and I really wanted to be able to give back and really focus on people who probably need this information the most and they're getting it the least.
Yeah, that's incredible. And so do the clients that you work with, Andrew, are they over the world, or how do you, what sort of clients do you work with?
So I do have clients over the world. It's obviously, some states, countries are different. I like to say when people ask how much I charge, my answer is it depends how much I like you. And although that's not, it's official, but it's not official, right? I like helping people. And if somebody's nice, you prefer to work with them. And if I don't get at least a chuckle from somebody on that, then we're probably not going to be a good fit.
I love that. Like we often talk about on the podcast, actually, build your business based on your passion. But part of that is working with people that you want to work with. So I
Yes.
love that. I charge you however much I like you.
One of the funniest times ever was when the wife said, well, then we're definitely screwed because I know my husband. And I said, no, it's okay. I like you a lot, so it'll even out.
Well, thank you for the honesty. I really appreciate that today. Andrew, how did that diagnosis that you received influence your business?
Well, again, it completely reshaped and changed it, right? I went from working with a certain subset of clients, not as niche specialized. And I actually always struggled with that. I wanted to work with people who were like me, but I wasn't really sure. It's like engineers, analytical. I had clients I liked working with, but it completely changed it, right? I went from, let's say, being, a generalist, although having clients I liked working with, to really diving all in and focusing on a specific group.
And how important was it for you to get that diagnosis? Because I know a lot of people that we were having a conversation literally just this morning in my group where this lady was saying, I'm just really struggling with planning in my business because I've got this content diary and I don't know how to fill it in. It's too overwhelming. I don't know where to start. And she's never had a diagnosis, but she's got some beliefs that, that maybe that she does need to seek some additional support to actually understand whether a diagnosis would be necessary. What do you think about that, Andrew?
So I think it depends on, the reason you want a diagnosis too. I think it's extreme. I know it can be really hard to obtain officially, especially for adults and especially women. It can be hard to find somebody. But some things, for example, like I can't write in a diary either, right? Again, I mentioned open-ended questions was one of like the best realizations to just help me structure. So, just finding, okay, there's nothing wrong with me if I can't just start journaling in something open-ended in a diary. Let me find another way. Let me, fill in the blanks from questions that are asked from me. And I think it's also just very self-validating. I even when I was diagnosed, I'm like, this can't be me. This doesn't make sense. I thought I knew what, autism was, and I didn't.
Okay, sure. So with that in mind, Andrew, and just to kind of help me today as well to interview you on today's podcast, I'd really appreciate to really understand how we can support this conversation in a way that makes it useful to communicate, and also, to make things easy for us too while we're chatting today. So one of the things that really intrigues me is about how do people deal with money if they are on the spectrum. What would there be any tips, or what would be useful for us to talk about there, Andrew?
So I think some of the biggest things are, especially when it comes to anxiety and impulse control, which is not something, completely unique to somebody with autism, right? But it is almost everyone with autism has, that in common. So I find setting up a system where, you can help with the impulse control. I also find, if you can take a step back a day or two, or find a reason to, delay spending money, and as many things as part of a routine autopilot that are repeatable, and doable again. I'm going to say something that's probably quite unpopular. I think budgets are useless. I don't think anyone actually keeps a budget. I don't keep a budget, but it's important to look back at what you've done over the past, month or 2 months or 3 months, see trends, and then maybe how you can adjust the trends going forward. I think if financial planning is overwhelming for everyone, right? It's a lot, but I think especially for people with autism, breaking it up into just small, meaningful steps, right? Moving in the right direction a little bit is what's important.
I love those shares there, actually, because Andrew, one of the things that we talk about on the podcast is about small steps. It's about breaking things down into manageable steps, because as you say, that can really help to reduce the anxiety and some of the overwhelm that can be felt around money. And I think that's relevant to whether you're on the spectrum or not, because emotions play a very key part of our emotional relationship with money and how we make decisions. So you talked there about automating money. So would that be things like putting money aside for specific things, having specific accounts for certain expenditures and for certain purposes?
Yeah, and even if you're trying to figure out how much you might spend, right? The easier it is to be able to have something that categorizes it for you, right? Or the easier that you can have certain things paid for and taken care of automatically. The less energy you have to spend, the more things that you can, automate, but still make sure that they're, taken care of. Just ignoring things for 20 years usually doesn't work unless you bought Apple stock and forgot about it.
Damn, I wish I'd done that 20 years ago. Okay, and what about for parents of children, whether they're young children or adult children? Is there a difference between how we should manage money when we're younger versus as we're going into our adult life?
So, well, the answer is yes. When you're an adult, you actually make it, right? But I think the question's two parts. Let me answer. For the parents, and I'm going to answer this directed at them. It's important to also remember that children are still children. As you mentioned before, a lot of the things that might help with autism are not necessarily unique, right? There are things that are unique, but sometimes, the teenager who wants to stay home and play video games all day, it's because they're a teenager. It's not because they're on the spectrum, right? So I think it's hard to separate that. But also, I find a lot of parents are very, lack of a better term, just sheltering of the child, right? So they're so used to fighting for everything, taking care of everything, doing so much, that I think one of the most important things they can do is almost not shelter in a way, right? Include the individual in those decisions and in those choices, and let them know what they're doing and why, right? I don't think anyone is beyond, advocating for themselves, or, being able, to live as independent as possible. And keep flexibility. Don't have in your head, as a parent, what your child at 8 may or may not be able to do based upon a diagnosis. I don't know if, any 8-year-old, right? Their life is completely predictable, 10, 15 years from now. So I find it's pretty important to be flexible and reasonable.
Great. So creating routines, automating things can be useful. You mentioned there, Andrew, that some things are unique. And some things are just because, they're an 8-year-old child, and actually talking to kids about money is important anyway. But you did mention that some things are unique. What kind of things would be?
I think you muted.
I just lost my mic there for a second. I'm having an absolute nightmare with technology today. My Mac completely died on me about 10 minutes ago, so my apologies. Andrew,
No
what I
problem.
was just asking there is, you mentioned that there are some things that are unique.
Yep.
What sort of things might be unique?
So I would say the level of anxiety, right? And one thing from my discovery with my autism is I didn't think I had bad anxiety. I wouldn't have even described it because I never knew what life was like without anxiety, right? So if you've always been that way, how do you know you don't know that it's different, if that makes sense? So I think the anxiety and also the impulse control and what we refer to as, executive function, just being able to, you know, remember to do certain things, right? I think my wife is still waiting for me to put like the clothes away or the hamper, or there's just certain things like I forget to do, like, put the, that seems silly that you'd think I was drunk, right? Where I put the cereal in the fridge and the milk in the cabinet sometimes. And, or so that's where, automating as much as possible, right? I think is really even more so, not because it's laziness. And I think it's important to not be shameful. I find many individuals feel like they should know more. They feel like, they made lots of mistakes when in reality, again, you have a podcast because it's not that unique. Plenty of people have, stories and around money, and relationship with money is very complicated. So in that way, I find it comforting to say, and you can't ignore it forever, right? Bills are one thing that will eventually catch up to you, right?
And are there any other uniquenesses between people that are on the spectrum and people who are not on the spectrum?
I would say that the benefits and resources available. So getting a job is obviously much more, there's a lot more complications with that. Healthcare is a bigger concern. There's usually a lot of coexisting, medical conditions, and planning for the fact of if you're receiving any sort of disability benefits, right? Being able to work and maintain those benefits. Can you work? There's a whole lot more of a maze that's a very short term. I mean, obviously you need your healthcare, but at the same, I think that can make it really hard, even harder to plan for the long term.
Why is it so much harder to plan for the long term?
So I think part of it's autism, right? And part of it is where, again, many on the spectrum, we think very, just right in front of us. We get a little too absorbed in the details for seeing the big picture. And when you think about planning for retirement, I mean, or, some 30-year plus away date that's vague and indescript, right? That's probably like the epitome of what, we're good at planning for.
And do you know what? As you're saying these things, Andrew, I'm sitting here nodding to myself, because all of these things that you're sharing, I think, are so relevant to everybody. Having a vague financial plan and thinking roughly in 30, 40 years' time, what am I going to be doing when I retire, is very difficult for most people to get their head around. Our brain is just not wired to think about the future. Its job is to protect us, and our job is to protect us in the here and now. So I'm very curious to this, because I think everything that you're sharing is like these golden nuggets of things that we should all be doing, whether we're on the spectrum or not. But I appreciate that there can be higher levels of anxiety. There can be a greater need to go into some of the detail with money and finances if we're on the spectrum, for what you said, Andrew. What advice would you give to clients or to parents or caregivers in addition to the ones that you've already shared, Andrew, that can help them to maybe come. Sorry, my mic went again. What advice would you give to parents or caregivers in addition to what you've already shared?
I think it would be that there's see that was too vague a question. So
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
I'll call you out on that one. So I mean I would say for if we think about it in the term of going back to what you said, right, where a lot of the advice I'm giving is good for everyone. And I think that's the way everything should work, whether it's employment, it's universal design, right? Meaning there's nobody on the planet who likes fluorescent lights in the ceiling, right? Even though somebody with autism may struggle with them a little bit more. So I think, focusing on that, right? Focusing on the things that are good, that are repeatable, and also understand that on one hand, the challenges are harder. On the other hand, I think the fact that it's not that unique in some ways, I think most clients find very comforting, right? And to not feel shame for not starting, right? I know many individuals with autism and families, it's a lot of one-parent households, right? There's a lot usually less income or planning for the disability or, the amount of income potential from working and the amount of extra planning required is even more. So don't feel bad if you're getting a late start, right?
And do you find, Andrew, that one of the things I find interesting about shame and guilt that you just mentioned there, and I think that's relevant to so many people, we have so much guilt and shame around money. And actually, it's not the money that creates that, it's the meaning that we attach to money that creates those feelings. And I think 100% I agree with you that one of the first things that we all need to do is to take an opportunity to reflect on decisions that we've made and not to beat ourselves up about them, because that guilt and shame can sit with us and then actually have an impact on how we make decisions going forward. So I think that's very relevant to most people. In terms of one of the things we've been talking about, Andrew, in our community is that how banks can support people that are on the spectrum. Do you find in where you are, do you find that there are some banks or certain types of accounts that provide maybe different facilities or better functions or different ways to communicate with their customers to help people that are on the spectrum?
So I would say for the most part, most of the financial industry is not very good, right? We are very focused on, if you read the literature I have on, specializing in financial planning, those with autism, there's children who never grow up. It's people like me don't exist, right? And it's all planning for the parents and that, the child can never have any money or they'll spend it or, it's very, so even if there was something designed, the individual would be turned away. I think one of the great things is online banking, online apps make it really easy. So I really find this is an area where you don't have to necessarily look for something that's, let's say, an autism-friendly bank or something that's specific. Just, well, what would an autism-friendly bank, or spending program look like? And have those attributes, from something else. So I think that's important to figure out, why you're looking for something so you can kind of figure out what it is. There are certain types of accounts, like over here, there's what we call ABLE accounts, which are alternative to college savings for those with disabilities. So those are relatively common, but I encourage to just going back to the tips are probably good for everyone, right? I think it's important to, have, let's say, a bank that's really good online that you never need to go to in person, that ideally you never need to even call somebody. There's an app called Truebill which will even cancel subscriptions for you. It's amazing. We use it to cancel a gym membership, because if you've ever tried to, cancel a gym membership, I assume it's the same. It's impossible.
Yeah.
But that causes a lot of anxiety. And I think even phone calls, dealing with customer service, and we'll just let things go versus want to talk to somebody about them and not cancel the service. So that's an example where, let's say this app is not autism specific, but I think it's amazing for anyone who deals not just with autism, but social anxiety as well.
Because it sounds like very much the two are connected. So if we could automate our savings and use those kind of functionalities that can help to reduce some of the anxiety, then that's what you're saying.
Exactly, 100%. And just, and also a lot of individuals with autism have alternative forms of communication. They don't like to talk on the phone, right? And again, how I talk when I'm talking about money is different than most other subjects. I can speak a lot better. It's one of my, if not my favorite thing to talk about. So I really find that, having a bank where you don't need to go in person, it's so much easier now. Depositing checks, if anybody gets them, mailing checks, having a good, online bank account, right? And just having one that's ease of use, because I find we'll get frustrated and want to give up. And the last thing we want to do is to stop before we even really get started.
And one other question for you, Andrew, and this came up in my community recently, was what happens if you've got teenage children or kind of children in their 20s and you're trying to encourage them to be independent with their finances, but they are getting into difficulties with overspending because of anxiety and fear and things that can trigger people into actually overspending.
Yep.
Is there anything in addition to what you've already mentioned that would help people that are in that kind of age range where parents are trying to release a little bit of responsibility, but also there's a bit of fear there about overspending?
I don't think parents release enough responsibility in my experience. I feel like they left a little responsibility once and then that was it. And also you have to do it from an angle of not shaming or embarrassing when the decision was made, right? Because, many times, especially if the, individual just went through a really tough time, they may not even remember what they said, why they did it. And they're a completely different person when they, let's say, come down from that. So I think it's really important to keep it consistent. So, for example, instead of, why aren't you following your budget every month, right? Because nobody does. Okay, well, you spent this much on food, you usually spent this much. Why was that? And maybe instead of buying 6 energy drinks in the morning, you can buy 4, right? Or just something that's very small, easy to do, repeatable. And I find many parents essentially give up too easily, right? They don't feel, I think any 18-year-old likes to spend money on new things and buy new things. And that's also the other part too, is to take a step back and figure out, well, what's autism and what isn't, right? And the tip should be good for everyone. But, I find not teaching the individual, not taking their power away, right, and not letting them spend is not the solution, even if I'm not positive what the exact solution is.
And as you were talking there, I can almost imagine it's like a kite, isn't it? Like you want to release the string on the kite to give them that independence and responsibility and sense of worthiness around money. But at the same time, encourage them to have that control, automating their savings and some of the things that you've talked about today, Andrew. And finally, some of the people who listen to my podcast are financial planners themselves or financial advisors. And we teach a financial coaching training program. We deliver that internationally. And we talk a lot about emotions and behaviors and beliefs and how we should really focus on those things first before we look at our behaviors and our actions. if we have any financial advisors listening to the podcast today, Andrew, and they have clients that are on the spectrum, what could we do as a financial services profession? How could we come together collectively to support people more than what we're doing at the moment? Because you're really pioneering this over in the US.
Well, thank you, and I'll forgive you again. That was slightly open-ended, but no, again, I'm used to it. It's good. I think, I mean, and just one of the things that I really think we can do is realize, just everything that we've said, that individuals with autism, exist, right? I mean, first and foremost, and that treating them just honestly as a human being, right? As somebody, and not, I find a big relation is very similar to how women are often left out of the financial conversations, right? So there's the husband and wife, the husband's older, the male financial advisor, I'm sure you talk about this, right? Is talking to the guy, leaving the woman out of the conversation. And I find we do that a lot, especially when it comes to somebody, with autism, right? So somebody will say, oh, and I have autism. That means nothing to me. Like you said, it's such a big, spectrum, right? Somebody with autism, just the range of what they're capable of, what they're good at, what they might need is as unique as any individual, right? So I think to, really ask, well, tell me about this person, right? Like, I'm not going to, if somebody says, well, and they have autism, I don't think they usually elaborate more beyond that, right? Like, what are they good at? What do they like to do, right? How can you foster that? And I think the more everyone with autism has an interest that they're obsessed with, right? Special interest. Mine happens to be money. But the more that could be utilized in working with somebody, the better, right? So whether it's printing checks with a picture of, penguins, if the person likes penguins, that's just an example. Not that anyone writes checks anymore.
Yeah, I love that. Aligning their passion, their superpowers, if you like, with money. Because we do know, don't we, that, people who generally are on the autistic spectrum do have fascinations, and, they're incredibly intelligent people. I actually grew up with a lot of young adults with disabilities and mentally handicapped adults, because my uncle was born and he had a allergic reaction to penicillin, and it caused him to be brain damaged. And so my dad and his brother, my uncle, we were always surrounded with people on the spectrum and with disabilities. So I kind of grew up with being exposed to people with all sorts of superpowers. And I love how you've just shared that from a financial planning perspective. Really think about harnessing what they love and what they're interested in, and how we can link that to their financial planning work, or the work that we're trying to help them with. So thank you so much. That was really, really valuable, Andrew. And I think really what that demonstrates to me is that all of the tips that that you've shared today are kind of relevant to all of us. It's just being, I guess, aware that if you are on the spectrum, there will be certain things that will aid you and support you in reducing some of the anxiety and helping you to get more control, systems and processes and things in place to ultimately aid that financial relationship. And Karen, and I've gone again. And one of my clients, Karen, has just commented on the Facebook Live, and she said that, yes, special interests, that is great for hyperfocus. I don't know what hyperfocus means. I don't know whether you can shed any light.
Think of like a, obsession, right? Or it's, I mean, the way I like to think about it is I can't write well. I can't write to save my life. It would take me, forever, right, to try to do a writing task. But I could do, let's say a math task in, a fraction of what it might take somebody else. So I think it's to, especially with autism, even though it's good strategy for everyone, is to really focus on doing more of what you're good at and to not try so much to, focus on what you're not good at, right? And I think that's one of the things we kind of have to unlearn from, let's say, school, where they teach you a little bit of, everything. I think it's really important to know that's okay if you don't know, geometry, right? Focus on what you're really good at instead. And I think that's even more important for individuals with autism.
Yeah, and there's somebody watching this live on Facebook right now, and Mark has shared, start searching for the different ability, not a disability. I think that's a great way to look at it. Because they reckon, don't they, that most of us are on the spectrum to some degree. I've even questioned whether I am on the spectrum, because I definitely have qualities associated with being on the spectrum and challenges on the spectrum, and I think we're all on that spectrum to some degree.
So that is a part where I will disagree with you, and I feel pretty strongly, but because the spectrum, it's not really one thing, right? There's, people say they have anxiety and autism, or anxiety or autism and ADHD, and I think, right, everyone with autism has both those things and lots of more other things, and it's the combination of them that really creates someone on the spectrum. The example I like to give is, nobody says they're just a little bit pregnant because they have swollen ankles. Right? That might be a symptom of being pregnant, and that's not bad, but I would say that most of the people who, let's say, are on the spectrum themselves really prefer, it almost feels a little invalidating. And I know you were not trying to be mean in any way, shape, or form. We appreciate it. But that's definitely somewhere where I feel passionately is, I think we all have traits of other human beings, I think is probably a better way to put it, right? But
Yeah.
yes, right?
Thank you for challenging me on that, actually, because that really resonates. And maybe that's the empath in me, that I just want to feel connected and want to be able to support people because of that empathic quality. Because I feel people's emotions very highly. So yeah, thank you for challenging me on that. That's really interesting, and thank you for doing so. So Andrew, if anybody would like to connect with you to find out more about your work and your research, what would be the best way for them to reach out and to connect with you?
So I have a website, planningacrossthespectrum.com. I have a Facebook and LinkedIn page where I post very well. I don't think I have as many people as you, Catherine, but I'm, working on it. I like to share very consistently good content on my social media, my website. We try to do just a monthly newsletter, nothing too crazy. And my email's andrew@planningacrossthespectrum.com, or you can find that on my website as well.
Great. And we'll pop some links to those in the show notes of the podcast that we'll be going out in a couple of weeks' time. I actually subscribed to your newsletter and received that this week, Andrew, and really, really enjoyed reading some of the information that was in your newsletter. So I would highly recommend that everybody goes and subscribes to Andrew's newsletter. So thank you so much for your time today, Andrew. It's been a pleasure to interview you. Please hang around just for a moment while I just hit the end button on Facebook whilst we're streaming this. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.